They were told love was a sin, so they chose it anyway. In the dead of night, two women risk everything, faith, safety, even their future, to escape a world that tried to silence their hearts. What happens next isn't just rebellion, it's freedom, it's sacrifice, it's a love powerful enough to burn down everything in its way. If you want to experience a story that challenges belief, defies rules, and proves love is worth any risk, like, subscribe, and stay with me till the end. The iron gate slammed shut behind me with a grinding finality that seemed to echo through my bones. Metal scraped against stone in a harsh, unrelenting sound that lingered in the courtyard like the ceiling of a grave. I stood still, my hands buried deep in the coarse wool of my habit, watching the last fragment of my former life vanish behind the bars. Above me, the sky bled from bruised violet into darkness, and the air carried the scent of damp stone and rotting leaves. I had told myself I came here for peace. I had repeated it to the gatekeeper, whispered it to myself while packing my single bag and turning my back on the distant glow of the city. I craved silence, a way to quiet the relentless noise inside my mind, the restlessness that had haunted my nights, the persistent feeling that my life beyond these walls had never been enough. Yet when the lock snapped into place, a chill crept down my spine that had nothing to do with the cold. It was not only the sensation of being enclosed, but something far stranger, the sense that I had been expected. The convent of St. Agatha rose before me, nothing like the gentle sanctuary I had imagined. It loomed against the fading light like a fortress designed to imprison rather than protect. The sister who greeted me offered no words, only a silent nod, her face obscured beneath her veil as she motioned for me to follow. Our footsteps crossed the cobblestones, muffled by moss that swallowed sound, leaving behind a silence that felt unnatural. It was not calm or comforting. It was dense, watchful, pressing in as though it carried its own awareness. The building seemed to observe me as I walked. Narrow windows cut into the stone like watchful eyes, and the ivy clinging to the walls twisted like veins pulsing beneath the surface. Inside, the air shifted colder, heavier, tinged with beeswax and the lingering ghost of incense. My guide stopped before a large oak door, knocked twice without hesitation, and then turned away, her robes whispering softly as she disappeared down the corridor. Left alone, the stillness deepened. I adjusted my skirt, trying to steady my breath as my heart pounded against my ribs. Authority had never sat well with me, and now I stood at the threshold of its highest form within these walls. I told myself it was only nerves, the weight of the vows awaiting me. But beneath that fragile reassurance was something else entirely. Anticipation, sharp and undeniable. The door opened without invitation, revealing a chamber lit by flickering candles. I stepped inside, the floor creaking beneath me. The room was austere yet carried an undeniable presence, dominated by a dark wooden desk, scattered with papers and an open Bible. But none of it held my attention for long. My gaze found her. Mother Superior Magdalene stood behind the desk, every detail of her posture controlled and deliberate. I had heard whispers of her during my journey, stories of her severity, her unyielding rule, her absence of warmth. They had spoken of her beauty too, though in the same breath as danger, like something admired from a distance. None of those words had prepared me. She was striking in a way that felt almost severe. Time had not softened her features but sharpened them, carving precision into every line of her face. Her eyes were the most arresting, dark, unwavering, and fixed on me with an intensity that made my breath falter. She said nothing at first, allowing the silence to stretch as her gaze moved over me in quiet assessment. It felt invasive, as though she could see beyond my composure, beyond the fabric of my habit, into the tangled unrest beneath. I should have lowered my eyes, should have shown humility, but I couldn't. Something in her held me in place, unyielding. There was a flicker in her gaze, something restrained yet alive, like a flame briefly stirred by unseen air. When she finally spoke, her voice filled the room without effort, low and controlled. It carried authority that did not need to be raised to be obeyed. I responded, though my words felt fragile in comparison, barely steady enough to leave my lips. She moved then, stepping out from behind the desk with a quiet, deliberate grace. Each step closed the distance between us until she stood close enough that I could sense her presence fully. There was no trace of hesitation in her movements, no uncertainty. When her hand lifted, I instinctively tensed, but she did not withdraw. Her fingers touched my chin, cool and steady, guiding my gaze upward. The gesture was firm, deliberate, yet not without a subtle gentleness that made it more disarming. My breath caught as something unfamiliar stirred beneath the surface, a reaction I could neither justify nor suppress. I should have stepped back. I should have resisted. Instead, I remained exactly where I was, caught between instinct and something deeper I could not name. Her voice softened, but the control within it did not waver. When I answered her, the truth slipped out before I could restrain it. She seemed almost satisfied, though her expression barely shifted. The moment passed as quickly as it had come. She withdrew, turning away, the distance between us, restoring the structure of authority that had momentarily blurred. Yet the impression of her touch lingered, as tangible as if it had left a mark. Her words shifted, becoming measured, instructive, framing this place not as refuge but as something far more demanding. Discipline, silence, obedience. Each carried weight beyond their simple meaning. Silence here was not emptiness but presence, a space where unseen things gathered. When she handed me the key, the contact between our fingers was brief but unmistakable. The air seemed to tighten, charged with something unspoken. Her instructions were clear, yet beneath them ran an undercurrent I could not ignore midnight. Her private quarters, no witnesses, no words shared, the command left no space for refusal. I accepted, though my pulse betrayed the storm rising within me. As I turned to leave, my legs felt unsteady, the corridor beyond colder than before. Yet even as I stepped away, I felt her gaze follow, unwavering, fixed. Her final words lingered long after the door closed behind me. In the silence that followed, nothing felt empty anymore. The convent no longer seemed like a place of refuge. It felt alive, filled with something unseen, something waiting. I had come searching for peace, believing I could leave behind the unrest that had driven me here. But as I walked through the dim corridor, the weight of the key in my hand, a truth settled deep within me. I had not escaped anything. I had stepped directly into something far more consuming. I pressed the key against my chest until its edges dug into my skin, grounding me in something solid while everything else slipped into uncertainty. A prayer formed on my lips out of habit, but it carried no conviction. I already knew I did not want rescue. Whatever waited at midnight had taken hold of me, and I was no longer trying to resist it. The clock in my cell carved time into something sharp and unforgiving. Each tick struck through the silence with a weight that felt almost physical, as though it were counting down to something inevitable. Seconds passed like quiet judgments, closing in on the moment I would have to leave the thin safety of my room and step back into the darkness where she lingered. Midnight drew closer, the hour steeped in whispers, in unseen boundaries thinning, in truths that refused to stay buried. I sat on the edge of my narrow cot, hands clenched tightly together, attempting to pray. But the words fell apart before they could take shape. Familiar verses tasted hollow, crumbling into nothing. In their place came the memory of her presence, vivid and persistent. The faint trace of lavender, the lingering impression of her touch, the way it had unsettled something deep within me. Sleep had offered no escape. Each time I drifted, she was there again, standing in candlelight, her gaze steady and unreadable, holding something just beyond understanding. It did not feel like fear. That was the most unsettling part. Fear could be fought, resisted, cast away. This was something else entirely, something that had been waiting beneath the surface for far too long. I rose abruptly, the cold stone floor biting into my bare feet as I moved. The small crucifix on the wall caught my eye, and I paused before it, forcing out a quiet apology that sounded empty even to my own ears. The truth was already decided. I was going to her, stepping forward by choice, drawn by something I could no longer deny. The corridor beyond my door had transformed with the night. Shadows stretched and pooled along the walls, thick and consuming, while the silence deepened into something absolute. Even the faintest sound seemed magnified. The brush of fabric, the soft shift of my steps, each one echoing as if the building itself were listening. The convent no longer felt like a sanctuary. It felt watchful, aware, as though it understood exactly where I was going. No one stopped me. No doors opened. No voices questioned my presence. The halls remained empty, holding their breath as I moved through them, guiding me toward the inevitable. When I reached the heavy oak door, I hesitated only for a moment. The possibility of turning back flickered faintly, fragile and already fading. Then my hand lifted and the knock came. Soft, deliberate, final. Her voice answered from within, low and precise, cutting cleanly through the silence. I stepped inside. The room had changed with the night. Darkness gathered along the edges, leaving the center illuminated by the warm, restless glow of candlelight. She stood near the window, her back turned, her attention fixed on the black expanse beyond the glass. She did not acknowledge me at first. allowing the quiet to stretch until the door clicked shut behind me, sealing the space between us. Her command came without urgency, yet it carried weight enough to move me instantly. I crossed the room, each step tightening the tension coiled inside me, until I stood just behind her. Then she instructed me to turn, and I obeyed without hesitation. The glass reflected us both, myself rigid and uncertain, her presence close enough to feel without seeing directly. When she stepped nearer, the distance vanished completely. The faint contact of fabric against fabric, the warmth at my back, the steady certainty in her movements. It all unraveled whatever composure I had tried to hold. Her voice lowered, no longer distant but close, shaping every word with deliberate control. Her hands found my shoulders, firm and steady, guiding me into stillness, correcting, adjusting, shaping. The pressure was unyielding, yet it steadied something inside me, drawing the tension out piece by piece. She moved with intention, each gesture precise, as though she were refining something unfinished. My hands were taken, repositioned, opened, no longer clenched but held in a way that felt both exposed and purposeful. Her presence surrounded me, leaving no space for distraction, no room for anything except awareness. When she turned me to face her, the candlelight framed her form, casting shadows that softened nothing yet revealed everything. Her gaze held mine, unwavering, seeing more than I wanted to admit. I gave the answer that felt safest, the one expected of me, but it did not satisfy her. She saw through it effortlessly, naming the truth I had tried to conceal even from myself. The restlessness, the thoughts I could never silence, the pull toward something undefined but undeniable. Her hand rose again, this time slower, tracing a path that made it impossible to pretend this was only instruction. I stilled, caught between hesitation and surrender, yet I did not pull away. The choice had already been made long before this moment. Her words blurred the lines I had relied on, shifting certainty into something far less stable. Right and wrong no longer felt clear, only distant, replaced by something far more immediate and impossible to ignore. A quiet admission escaped me, unguarded and real. She responded not with dismissal but with assurance, firm, unwavering, leaving no doubt in its intent. Safety, protection, control, all woven together in a way that should have unsettled me, yet instead settled something deep within. For a fleeting moment, the rigid authority she carried seemed to soften, revealing something quieter beneath it. Not weakness, but something closer to understanding, perhaps even loneliness. It mirrored something in me, something I had never fully acknowledged. Gratitude came naturally, though it felt fragile against the weight of everything else. She dismissed it with ease, shifting the moment again, reminding me that what lay ahead would demand more than simple thanks. When she leaned closer, resting her forehead against mine, the world narrowed to that single point of contact. Breath, warmth, stillness, everything else faded. It felt like something sacred without needing words, a quiet exchange that existed outside of rules or expectation. Time stretched, undefined, until the moment fractured. The knock shattered the silence with violent clarity, dragging reality back into place. She moved away instantly, the shift abrupt and absolute. Whatever had existed between us vanished beneath the return of control, her expression hardening, her composure restored in an instant. The voice from the other side of the door carried authority of its own, enough to change everything in a single breath. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across her face, brief but unmistakable. Her command came sharply, stripped of everything but urgency. I moved without thinking, retreating into the shadows behind the heavy curtain, pulling it closed just as the door began to open. Darkness swallowed me whole. I could see nothing, but every sound became sharp, immediate. The faint rustle of fabric as she composed herself, the steadying breath she drew before facing whoever waited beyond the door. And silent, I remained there, my pulse racing, knowing that whatever happened next would change everything. The door creaked open, and I froze in the darkness behind the curtain. "Bishop," Magdalene said, her voice instantly transformed, cold, sharp, untouched by anything that had passed between us. "To what do we owe this visit at such an hour?" His reply slid into the room like oil over water, smooth and unsettling. He spoke as though he already knew more than he should, as though every word was a test meant to expose something hidden. I pressed my hand harder against my mouth, forcing my breath into silence, my body trembling despite every effort to remain still. The faint trace of lavender that clung to my skin no longer comforted me. It felt dangerous now, like evidence of something forbidden lingering too close to the surface. The curtain hung heavy around me, suffocating. Through its thickness, every sound sharpened. His voice wound through the space, speaking of inspections, of rumors whispered through corridors, of disturbances in a place meant to be defined by silence. Magdalene answered him without hesitation, her words precise and impenetrable, deflecting each insinuation with controlled authority. I heard the subtle shift of objects, the scrape of wood, the faint clink of metal, the measured pacing of boots crossing the floor. Time stretched unbearably, each second dragging into the next. My thoughts scattered into desperate fragments of prayer, not for forgiveness, but for invisibility. I wanted to disappear completely, to become something unnoticed, untouched, whatever scrutiny filled the room. At last, the tension broke with the sound of the door opening again. His footsteps retreated, fading into the corridor until silence reclaimed the space once more. It returned heavier than before, thick and suffocating. "Come out," Magdalene's voice cut through it, quieter now, but edged with urgency. I stepped from behind the curtain, my limbs unsteady. She stood near the desk, gripping its edge so tightly her knuckles had drained of color. When her eyes met mine, something unfamiliar flickered within them. Fear, unmistakable and raw. It mirrored the dread tightening in my chest. "Go," she said, her tone lowered but firm. "Return to your cell. Lock the door. Do not open it for anyone but me." I did not hesitate, I fled. The corridors blurred as I moved through them, my breath uneven, my pulse pounding so loudly it drowned out everything else. By the time I reached my room, my hands were shaking as I locked the door. I slid down against it, collapsing onto the cold floor, trying to steady myself. Seif never came. The memory of the bishop's presence lingered like a shadow, but it was not what haunted me most. What remained, stubborn and inescapable, was the warmth of her touch, the quiet intensity of it, the way it had settled beneath my skin. Even fear could not erase it. If anything, it burned brighter against the cold, the only thing keeping me from feeling completely hollow. Time dragged until the stillness became unbearable. The walls of my cell seemed to close in, tightening around me, leaving no space to breathe. I needed air. I needed distance. I needed something that resembled clarity. I slipped out again, moving carefully through the silent convent, my steps light, almost weightless. This time I did not turn toward her door. I went to the chapel. It stretched before me like a hollowed cavern, vast and dim. Only a single red light burned near the altar, casting a faint glow that barely touched the surrounding darkness. The air carried the scent of aged wood and wax, thick with something older, something that lingered long after prayers had faded. I walked slowly down the aisle, my presence swallowed by the space. The stillness there felt different, not comforting, not divine, but watchful in its own quiet way. The confessional stood to one side, carved from dark wood, its intricate panels designed to conceal and protect, to separate truth from identity. It offered anonymity, a place where words could exist without consequence. I stepped inside and knelt. The wood beneath me was cold, grounding. My hand trembled as I crossed myself, the motion instinctive, almost hollow. I did not expect anyone to be there. The hour was too late, the convent too still. Then came the sound, a shift. A breath, something moved in the adjoining space. The words left me automatically, shaped by habit rather than belief. They felt misplaced, fragile in the quiet. The response came immediately, low and unmistakable. Not a priest, the realization rooted me in place. Every instinct told me to leave, to break the moment before it deepened. But I remained where I was, unable to move. The thin wooden partition between us no longer felt like a barrier. It felt like a thread pulling us closer, binding us in a way that made distance irrelevant. Her voice softened, stripped of the rigid authority she wore so easily elsewhere. In the darkness, she was no longer distant or untouchable. She was present in a way that felt almost too close. Words spilled from me before I could contain them, unfiltered, honest in a way I had never allowed myself to be. Thoughts I had buried surfaced without resistance, shaped by the quiet and the unseen connection between us. She did not reject them. She did not silence them. Instead, she drew them out, step by step, until what I had tried to hide stood exposed between us. The truth settled heavily in the space, unspoken yet undeniable. When I admitted it, softly, barely more than a breath, it felt like crossing a line that could never be undone. Her reaction was not anger, not dismissal. It was something far more complicated, something that carried weight and restraint in equal measure. The distance between us remained, yet it felt thinner than ever, as though it could dissolve at any moment. Silence followed, but it was not empty. It was charged, alive, filled with everything we were no longer saying. Her words returned, quieter now, layered with something deeper, something that reached beyond instruction or control. She spoke of understanding, of recognition, of something shared rather than imposed. I leaned forward, resting against the thin lattice, as though proximity alone could bridge the divide. Fear lingered, sharp and persistent, but it no longer held the same power. She admitted it too. Not certainty, not strength, fear. The confession bound us more tightly than anything else could have. We remained there in the darkness, separated by carved wood yet connected in a way that felt undeniable. No movement, no touch, only presence, shared and unguarded. It carried a weight that neither of us tried to break. Then the stillness shifted. Her voice changed again, gaining urgency, losing the softness that had briefly surfaced. The barrier between us, once protective, now felt like an obstacle. I heard the faint scrape of wood as something moved, the partition no longer fixed in place. A warning stirred inside me, but it came too late. The separation was disappearing. Through the dim light, her outline emerged, her gaze fixed, unwavering. Her voice no longer filtered through the barrier. It reached me directly now, clear and immediate. The distance between us was no longer enough. I rose slowly, my legs unsteady, and stepped out into the open space of the chapel. The silence stretched endlessly around me, the red glow casting long, distorted shadows across the stone. And still, I moved forward. I moved around the confessional, each step slow, deliberate, as if the air itself had thickened. When I reached the other side, she was already standing, no longer kneeling, no longer hidden behind the ritual of distance. She was waiting. The space closed in the moment I entered it. The wooden walls seemed to press tighter, the darkness deeper, until it felt as though the world outside had vanished completely. She drew me further into the shadow, away from the open line of sight, into a place where even the faint glow of the chapel could not fully reach. Her voice cut through the quiet, low and steady, leaving no room for hesitation. I lifted my gaze, and suddenly she was impossibly close. The dim light caught her eyes, wide and dark, her focus locked entirely on me. When her hand rose to my face, the gesture echoed what had come before, but there was no restraint left in it now. No lesson, no discipline, only intention. Her words fell softly, yet they carried weight that settled deep within me. I tried to answer, to retreat into something safe, something expected, but she dismissed it with quiet certainty. Titles, roles, rules, none of them seemed to matter in that moment. What remained was simpler, more dangerous. She leaned closer, and instinct took over. My eyes closed, my breath caught, everything in me bracing for the inevitable. But she stopped just short, holding the distance between us with deliberate control. The pause stretched, charged, leaving me suspended in anticipation that felt almost unbearable. Her voice lowered further, brushing against the space between us, asking for something that felt both like a demand and a surrender. The answer came from somewhere deeper than thought, leaving my lips before I could contain it. For a brief second, everything aligned. Desire, fear, certainty, before it shifted again. She drew back, her attention flickering past me, awareness returning like a shadow creeping back into place. The tension did not disappear, but it sharpened, edged with caution. Whatever existed between us was no longer hidden by distance or denial, and that made it dangerous. Her instructions came quickly, firm but not unkind, pulling us both back from the edge we had nearly crossed. The loss of her closeness felt immediate, almost physical, but there was no time to linger in it. I turned, moving back through the chapel, each step heavy with something I could not separate, relief tangled with longing, fear woven tightly with something brighter. When I reached the doorway, something compelled me to look back. She was still there, standing in the shadows of the confessional, watching. But she was not alone. In the far corner of the chapel, near the statue, something shifted. A shape separated itself from the darkness, no longer part of it, but something living within it. My breath caught as the outline became clearer. A figure, still and silent, observing. The faint light caught on something in his hand, a dull glint that felt wrong in a place like this. Everything inside me went cold. She saw him too. I felt it in the sudden stillness of her posture, the way her body tensed. Without hesitation, she moved, placing herself between me and the darkness, shielding me from view. Her hand lifted slightly, a silent command, "Go." I didn't question it. I ran. The chapel fell behind me as I fled into the corridors. The image of that figure burned into my mind. Whatever fragile secrecy had existed was gone. Something had seen. Something new. Outside, the storm began as a whisper against the glass, but it grew rapidly, swelling into something wild and unrestrained. Rain lashed against the walls, thunder rolling through the sky with a force that seemed to shake the very foundations of the convent. I ran without stopping, the sound of the storm chasing me, merging with the pounding of my heart. Every shadow felt alive, every corner hiding something unseen. The sense of safety I had once believed in was gone, replaced by the certainty that nowhere within these walls was untouched by whatever had begun to unfold. The corridor lights flickered overhead, struggling against the storm, their faint hum rising into a strained buzz. Then, with a sharp crack, they failed completely, plunging everything into darkness. For a moment I stood frozen, the world reduced to nothing but sound. The storm, my breath, the frantic rhythm of my pulse. Then a voice called my name from the dark. I turned sharply, panic rising, but before I could react, a hand covered my mouth. Warm, familiar, grounding. The scent reached me first. Lavender, rain, something unmistakably hers. She stepped forward into the brief flash of lightning, her face pale, her composure fractured in a way I had not seen before. Fear lingered there, but so did determination. Her question came quickly, urgent, and I nodded, my voice barely steady when I managed to answer. The name she spoke in response carried weight, heavy with recognition and dread. There was no time to linger in it. Her arm moved around me, pulling me close, protective and unyielding. Even in that moment, with fear pressing in from every side, the contact sparked something familiar, something that refused to be extinguished. She guided me through the darkness, her grip steady, her movements sure despite the chaos around us. Lightning carved brief paths of visibility through the halls, illuminating the stone walls in sharp, fleeting bursts. The convent felt different now, alive in a way that was no longer subtle, the storm outside echoing something deeper within its walls. We reached the library, its doors heavy and unyielding, yet they opened under her touch. Inside, the air shifted, carrying the dry scent of old paper and worn bindings. It felt like stepping into another world, removed from the storm yet not untouched by it. She led me deeper, past rows of towering shelves, into a place hidden beyond what anyone would casually see. When she pushed against the cabinet, revealing the concealed space behind it, it felt like crossing another boundary entirely. The room beyond was small, enclosed, a secret carved into the heart of another secret. When the cabinet closed behind us, the darkness was absolute for a moment, until the strike of a match broke it. Candlelight flickered to life, soft and golden, casting shifting shadows across the confined space. The storm raged somewhere beyond the walls, but here it felt distant, muted. I sank onto the cushions, the closeness of the space pressing in from all sides. She sat opposite me, the rigid control she carried beginning to fracture, exhaustion and something deeper showing through. Her hands trembled. The admission came slowly, each word carrying more weight than the last. Fear for me, not just for herself. The threat that loomed outside these walls was real, and it reached further than I had understood. The truth of it settled heavily between us. What existed between us was not just forbidden. It was dangerous in ways neither of us could ignore. The question that had been building inside me finally broke free, raw and unavoidable. Her answer came just as quietly, stripped of pretense, leaving nothing hidden. It was not duty, not control, it was something far more human. Her confession shifted everything. Years of restraint, of silence, of denial, undone by something as simple and devastating as feeling alive for the first time. Her hand moved toward mine, hesitating only briefly before closing the distance. When our hands met, the contact was steady, grounding, undeniable. The fear, the storm, the looming threat, all of it faded, if only for a moment. What remained was the quiet space between us, lit by fragile candlelight, holding something neither of us could fully name but neither could deny. I moved closer, drawn by something stronger than reason. She rose to meet me, the distance between us dissolving completely. The tension that had built between us found its release, not in hesitation but in inevitability. For a moment the world beyond that hidden room ceased to exist. Only us remained, two people standing at the edge of something that would change everything. And this time, there was nothing left between us to hold it back. When I spoke, the words came without thought, carrying a truth that felt as terrifying as it was certain. They lingered in the air, fragile and irreversible. Her response met it without hesitation. The storm outside roared on, relentless, but inside that small, flickering space, everything felt suspended, as though time itself had paused to witness what we had become. For a fleeting moment, it felt like enough, like something that could endure, despite everything waiting beyond those walls. Then the sky split open with a violent crack of lightning, so close it shook the ground beneath us, shattering the illusion all at once. The lightning tore through the sky with blinding force, flooding the library with a stark, merciless white that forced everything into sharp clarity. For a single suspended instant, the hidden space was no longer hidden, and in that instant, I saw him. He stood just beyond the cabinet, not concealed, not lurking in shadow, but fully present, waiting, watching. The thin slats of wood did nothing to shield us. His gaze passed through them as if they weren't there at all. Bishop Thorne, there was no confusion, no doubt. In his hand was not proof to be gathered later, not some distant threat to be revealed in time. It was immediate, a key. Heavy, deliberate, final. The light vanished as quickly as it had come, returning us to the dim flicker of candlelight. But the moment had already burned itself into me. He had seen everything. There was no denial left, no illusion to cling to. Magdalene pulled away at once, the warmth between us breaking like something fragile under pressure. Her face had drained of color, her composure slipping for only a fraction of a second before something harder took its place. "He has the key," she said, barely above a whisper, but the weight of it settled heavily in the confined space. Understanding followed quickly, cold and absolute. This place had never been beyond his reach. It had always belonged to him in some way. Every hidden passage, every secret corner, nothing here was truly ours. A faint sound broke through the silence. Metal meeting metal, the lock panic surged through me, sharp and suffocating. I turned instinctively, searching for escape, but there was none. The walls pressed in closer, the reality of our confinement closing around us. There was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Magdalene stepped forward, placing herself between me and the door. The fear that had flickered moments before disappeared entirely, replaced by something unyielding. Her posture straightened, her expression hardened, and when she spoke, her voice carried a steady authority that refused to break. "Let him come." The words did not tremble. The lock gave way with a soft, decisive click. The cabinet door creaked open, and the dim light from the library spilled into the hidden space, stretching shadows across the floor. He filled the doorway, calm, controlled. Watching, his voice followed, measured and composed, as though nothing in the world had shifted. As though this moment were simply another conversation. Magdalene did not falter. Her response came sharp and unwavering, deflecting him with practiced ease. But he stepped closer, his attention moving between us with quiet precision. Taking in every detail, there was no rush in him, no anger, only certainty. The space shrank further as he closed the door behind him, sealing the three of us inside. The storm outside raged louder now, its force pressing against the walls like something desperate to break in. His attention settled on me. It was not a glance. It was an examination, the weight of it stripped away whatever composure I had managed to hold. Words failed me entirely, leaving only silence where a response should have been. Magdalene stepped forward again, intercepting him, drawing his focus back to her. She claimed the burden without hesitation, placing herself between me and whatever judgment he carried. Her voice did not waver, even as the consequences began to take shape in his expression. He acknowledged her with quiet approval, though it held no warmth. Only calculation. When he spoke again, it was with the calm authority of someone who had already decided the outcome. The paper he produced felt heavier than anything else in that moment. A simple object, yet it carried the power to divide everything we had just found. The words settled like a sentence passed without trial. I was to be sent away. Dastant. Separation. Finality. Magdalene's reaction came instantly, sharp and unrestrained, but it changed nothing. His authority stood firm, immovable, reinforced by the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly how much control he held. He turned to leave, pausing only long enough to deliver one final remark, soft, almost casual, yet cutting deeper than anything else he had said. Time, that was all he granted us. The door closed behind him, and the lock turned once more, sealing us inside. Silence followed. But it was no longer the same silence as before. It was fractured, heavy with what had just been set in motion. The strength left my body all at once. I sank down against the shelf, the reality of it crashing over me in waves I could not hold back. The thought of leaving, of being torn away, hollowed everything out. Magdalene moved quickly, kneeling beside me, her hands steady despite everything. Her voice was firm, refusing to let the despair take root. He would not win. The certainty in her tone cut through the chaos, forcing me to look at her. Something had shifted again. Not just resolve, but intent. There was a sharpness in her now, something deliberate, something prepared. This was no longer just survival, this was resistance. When she spoke again, it was with quiet conviction, outlining what had only begun to form. Authority was not absolute. Power could be challenged. Secrets, especially his, could be turned. The fear that had consumed the moment before began to shift into something else entirely. She extinguished the candles, plunging us into darkness once more. But this darkness felt different. It no longer concealed only fear. It held purpose. Her hand found mine, steady and certain. Stay close. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but within that hidden space, something had already changed. We were no longer just exposed. We were ready. Dawn arrived without comfort, its gray light seeping weakly through the cracks, revealing a world that felt drained of everything but consequence. Neither of us had slept. The storm had faded into a slow, persistent drip, each drop marking the passage of time with quiet inevitability. Magdalene remained near the door, watchful, unmoving, as though expecting it to break open at any moment. When the distant bell finally rang, she turned, her expression once again composed, the vulnerability of the night sealed away. With practiced precision, she unlocked the cabinet from within, the mechanism yielding quietly under her touch. We stepped back into the world as if nothing had changed. The corridors felt colder than before, their silence no longer neutral but observant. When we reached the point where our paths split, she stopped. There was no touch this time, no glance, only instructions. Normality had to be maintained. She would face what was coming. I watched her leave, her figure disappearing into shadow, and for the first time since arriving, the weight of isolation settled fully into place. Back in my cell, the hours dragged until morning forced movement. I prepared myself as expected, washing away the visible traces of the night, smoothing every imperfection into something acceptable. The reflection staring back at me was composed, obedient, unremarkable, untrue. The dining hall was filled with quiet routine, the rhythm unchanged on the surface. But beneath it, something had shifted. The air carried tension, subtle but undeniable. When I looked up, I saw it clearly. He sat where she should have been. Magdalene's place had been taken, and she sat beside him. The change was deliberate, visible to all, a silent declaration of power. She did not look at me, but I could feel her presence as strongly as ever. Then his gaze found me. It held, steady and unrelenting, stripping away every layer of composure I had built. I lowered my eyes, but it did nothing to lessen the weight of it. When he spoke, the entire room stilled, every movement paused, every breath seemed to hang suspended. His words were calm, almost concerned, but beneath them lay something far sharper, a reminder, a warning. The storm, he said, had been loud. Loud enough to hide many things. The meaning settled into the silence like something final, something waiting for its moment to strike. The sound of her voice cut through the wood like a blade wrapped in silk, controlled, measured, already bracing for impact. I stood frozen outside, breath caught in my throat, as the weight of what she was doing settled over me. She wasn't defending us. She was erasing me from the story entirely. She claimed it had all been her doing, her failure, her weakness. She painted herself as the one who had crossed the line, who had pulled me into something I did not understand. Every word she spoke was deliberate, chosen not for truth but for sacrifice. She was building a shield out of her own ruin, placing it between me and him. On the other side of the door, his silence stretched, calculating. Then came the faint rustle of paper, the quiet authority of consequence made tangible. He pushed her further, questioning the lie, testing its strength, trying to break it apart. But she did not bend. If anything, her voice grew steadier, colder, as if she had already accepted the cost. She offered herself completely, her title, her place, her future, just to secure mine. The scratch of the pen against paper echoed louder than any storm. It wasn't just ink. It was finality, a life being signed away in a single irreversible motion. My chest tightened until it hurt to breathe. Every instinct in me screamed to stop it, to burst through the door and tear the lie apart. She was giving up everything, and I was standing there, hidden in the shadows, letting it happen. The truth burned inside me, desperate to be spoken, but fear held it down. Fear of him, of what he could do, of losing everything. And yet, in that moment, the fear of losing her felt greater than all of it. She was choosing destruction so I could remain untouched, and I could not let her disappear like that. I forced the door open, the old wood groaning as it gave way, the sound cutting through the room and silencing everything inside it. Both of them turned at once. He stood behind the desk, composed, almost amused, a pen balanced between his fingers as if nothing here carried weight. She stood opposite him, pale and stunned, as though the ground beneath her had shifted. Don't sign it." My voice trembled, but I stepped forward anyway, shutting the door behind me. The sharp click of it closing echoed louder than it should have, sealing the moment in place. Her whisper came quickly, urgent and strained, telling me I shouldn't be there. But I had already crossed that line. I moved past her, placing myself between her and him, lifting my gaze to meet his without lowering it again. By every measure, I was insignificant in that room, unproven, powerless. But something in me refused to shrink. This was not something done to me. It was something I had chosen. I chose her. He leaned back slightly, studying me with a flicker of interest, as if I had become something unexpected. Brave, he called it, though the word carried a quiet edge of mockery. He spoke of sin, of vows not yet taken but already broken, of consequences that stretched far beyond this room. But the words no longer held the same power. I told him I wasn't abandoning anything. I was reshaping it. Faith without love felt hollow, and whatever he was offering in its place felt colder than any silence I had ever known. His answer came sharp and immediate, rooted in law and structure, in control. Mine came just as steady, grounded in something warmer, something that refused to be reduced to rules. The air between us hardened. He rose then, his presence looming, his voice dropping into something quieter but far more dangerous. He spoke of exile, of doors closing everywhere, of a future stripped bare until nothing remained. It was meant to isolate me, to make the choice feel like loss. Instead, I reached back and found her hand. Her fingers were cold, unsteady, but they closed around mine all the same. I held on, anchoring both of us in that single, undeniable truth. We were not alone. His gaze fell to our hands, and whatever patience remained in him twisted into something darker. The decision was made in his eyes before he spoke it aloud. There would be no compromise, no redemption offered on his terms. Only removal, only separation. But the fear he expected never came. She stepped forward then, no longer behind me, no longer silent. There was something different in her voice now. Quieter, yes, but stronger in a way that didn't need volume to be heard. Permission meant nothing to her anymore. Neither did his authority. We stood together, and that was enough. For a long moment, he said nothing. It was as if he was measuring the space between what he could control and what had slipped beyond him. Then the pen hit the desk with a soft final sound, his command following it without ceremony. Leave, so we did, not in haste, not in fear. We turned and walked out side by side, hands still joined, carrying something with us that he could neither name nor take. The hallway felt different when we stepped into it, lighter somehow, as though the walls themselves had loosened their grip. Her room no longer felt like a place to belong to. It felt like something already fading. She packed quickly, without hesitation, taking only what mattered. I did the same. It was startling how little a life could weigh when it was reduced to what could be carried. When I returned, she stood by the window, looking out at the high wall that marked the edge of everything we had known. The gates were no longer an option, closed, guarded, watched. But walls, no matter how high, were not absolute. We would not ask for an exit. We would make one. She removed the crucifix from her neck, the metal worn smooth with years of devotion, and placed it in my hand. It was warm, alive with the memory of her. I tried to refuse, but she closed my fingers around it with quiet certainty. Faith, she said, wasn't something bound to an object anymore. It had changed shape. It had found a new place to live. The weight of it settled against my chest, heavier than its size should allow. Dusk gave us our moment. We moved through the corridors one last time, ghosts in a place that had once defined us. The chapel doors remained closed as we passed, but I carried a silent gratitude with me, not for forgiveness, but for everything that had led me here. Outside, the air was cool, damp with the scent of earth and night-blooming flowers. The wall loomed ahead, tall and unforgiving, but no longer impossible. The ivy-covered trellis offered a fragile path upward. We climbed together, stone scraped against my palms, iron spikes glinting at the top like a final warning. I pulled myself over carefully, balancing on the narrow edge, then reached down for her. Her grip was strong, unwavering. When she joined me, we paused for a breathless moment, suspended between what had been and what could be. Fear lingered, sharp and undeniable. But so did something stronger. At her count, we let go. The fall stole the air from my lungs, pain flaring through my leg as I hit the ground. But it didn't matter. I pushed myself up, found her hand again, and steadied myself in the dark. Behind us, the convent stood silent, its windows beginning to glow with light, holding within it everything we had left behind. Ahead, the road stretched into uncertainty, unmarked and waiting. We chose it anyway. Each step carried us farther from the life that had tried to contain us, deeper into something unknown but undeniably ours. The night was alive with sound. Wind through trees, distant calls, the quiet rhythm of a world that did not judge or confine. Our hands remained linked, a constant in the shifting dark. Freedom wasn't something we had reached. It was something we were stepping into, one decision at a time, with no guarantee beyond each other. And that was enough. We walked as if the world had emptied itself of everything but us, two figures slipping away from what once felt like heaven and into something wild, uncertain, and alive. Magdalene never once turned her head. Her gaze stayed fixed on the horizon, where night slowly loosened its grip, purple bruises in the sky, softening into a fragile gray. Her hand held mine with quiet strength, anchoring me with every step. When my foot faltered on loose stone, she caught me instantly, her arm firm around my waist, steadying me before I could fall. She told me to lean on her, and though I tried to deny my weakness, she refused to accept the lie. There was no need to pretend anymore. No need to be unbreakable or flawless. The permission in her voice settled over me gently, and for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to give into it. I shifted closer, letting her carry part of my weight, letting myself be held without guilt or obligation. It felt unfamiliar, almost unreal, to be cared for simply because I existed, not because I had earned it through obedience or sacrifice. We kept moving, hour after hour, until the stars dimmed and the shapes of trees emerged like shadows waking from sleep. My ankle throbbed less sharply now, replaced by a heavy exhaustion that dragged at my body. But stopping was not an option. Not yet. We needed distance. We needed somewhere the past could not reach. By the time the sun began to rise, brushing the sky with gold and rose, we found ourselves at the edge of a small village wrapped in morning mist. It was quiet, untouched, its narrow streets and shuttered windows still half asleep. A church stood at its center, doors closed, but we passed it without slowing. Whatever sanctuary we needed, we already carried it between us. Magdalene led me to a modest inn at the edge of the village, its weathered sign creaking softly in the breeze. Inside, warmth surrounded us instantly, thick with the scent of smoke and coffee. An old man stood behind the counter, studying us with tired but kind eyes. He did not question our presence or our appearance. He saw only what mattered, our exhaustion. There was only one room left. It was enough. Magdalene offered the only thing of value she had brought, a simple ring, and the man accepted it without hesitation, sliding a key across the counter. We climbed the narrow stairs, each step echoing faintly beneath our feet, until we reached the small room at the end of the hall. It was simple, almost bare, yet it felt more beautiful than any place I had ever known. Magdalene closed the door behind us and leaned against it, her eyes shutting for a brief moment, as if the act itself sealed us away from everything chasing us. The clothes we wore suddenly felt heavy, like remnants of lives we had already shed. Without ceremony, we let them fall away piece by piece, the layers of fabric dropping to the floor until nothing remained but ourselves. There was no urgency in the way we came together then. No desperation, no fear, just a quiet closeness, a steady reassurance. We held each other as if grounding ourselves in something real, something that could not be taken. Time slowed, and for a while, the world outside simply ceased to exist. When we finally lay down, sleep did not come immediately. We faced each other in the dim light, tracing silent patterns against each other's hands, speaking in low voices about a future that had no shape yet. There were uncertainties, fears, questions we could not fully answer, but none of them felt strong enough to break what we had chosen. Eventually, exhaustion claimed us. I drifted into sleep with her hand wrapped around mine, the steady rhythm of her presence pulling me into rest. When I woke, sunlight filled the room, and she was already awake, sitting by the window, watching the world move beyond us. She looked different now, freer, softer, more herself than I had ever seen. We ate among strangers who paid us no attention, just two women sharing a quiet meal, invisible in the best way. When we returned to the room to prepare for leaving, I found the garments we had discarded still lying where they fell. They felt heavier than before, like relics of something we no longer belonged to. Magdalene took them from my hands without hesitation. A single flame turned them to ash, and we stood side by side watching the smoke rise and disappear. There was no regret in the moment, only a strange light clarity, as if something had finally been released. When we stepped back outside, the world felt wider, brighter. We walked toward the road without looking back, toward a future we could not predict but had chosen all the same. The words between us came easily now, no longer forbidden, no longer hidden. Ahead lay uncertainty, struggle, and a life we would have to build from nothing. But none of it frightened me the way it once would have. Whatever came, we would face it together. That was enough. At the crest of a hill, we paused, looking out over the valley stretching below us, alive with color and light. The city waited in the distance, distant and unknown, but it did not feel threatening. It felt like possibility. We kept walking, leaving behind the silence that had once defined us, and stepping into something louder, fuller, real. The road stretched forward without end, and for the first time, I did not fear where it might lead. We had walked away from everything that tried to contain us, and in doing so, we had found something far more powerful than certainty. We had found truth.